What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we're going over running back rankings, specifically rookie running back rankings for redraft leagues. If you want dynasty content, that's on the website. If you want for not just rookies, all running backs, that'll be next week's video on Wednesday. Today, just looking at rookies, just talking basically about, where they were drafted, what team they're on now, where we should be expecting to see them in ADP for the upcoming season, and then where I have them ranked right now. So first up, Bijan Robinson obviously goes 8th overall to the Falcons. That was on the high end of where we thought he could get drafted. Knew he was going to be the top running back. Know he's going to be the top running back for everyone in fantasy. Kind of crazy. So basically, we're going to look at Underdog's positional rankings just because that's where drafts are happening the most. His ADP right now is the running back 2, right behind McCaffrey. I have seen him go as high as 4th overall. In general, he's coming off the board in that like 5 to 10 sort of range. He's my running back 4. I think I have him 10th or 11th overall. Really depends on the format there, but running back 4 is more where I feel comfortable with him. For people taking him 4th overall, it's like, I don't see how you take him ahead of Jefferson, Chase, and McCaffrey. So that's why he slides into 4th overall. But when you take him that high, you're really kind of limiting that upside. And you're saying, you better have a fantastic season. So I don't want to say too many, negative things about Bijan because he's the only running back going into the S tier here. We know he's going to be fantastic. He's well worth a first-round pick. I just think some people taking him at like 4th, 5th overall, maybe a little bit too aggressive. I think late first round makes a lot more sense. But yeah, don't be worried about Algier. He's going to get a billion touches. He's going to be productive in fantasy. Don't hesitate being like, oh, it's a rookie running back. Should we take him this early? Yes, he's so locked into the role. He's going to be awesome. So that's the only player in S tier. We're going to start off the A tier with Jahmyr Gibbs. He goes only a few picks after, 12th overall to the Detroit Lions. A beautiful landing spot because they then traded away DeAndre Swift. He is going to be what everyone was hoping DeAndre Swift, including myself, was going to be. The Lions coaching staff just hates Swift for some reason. Not on the team anymore. They're in love with Gibbs. Coming off the board is running back 13 right now. My running back 11. So a little bit of value. He was coming off even later. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was more in like the upper teens right before. He's been rising in drafts. I would expect him to peak around the running back 10. I don't think he's going to enter the top 10. I don't think he's going to go ahead of let's say like Tony Pollard if they don't bring back Zeke. Like running backs in that sort of range, I think are going to stay ahead of him because we know Gibbs is not going to have huge rushing totals where some of these other running backs will have receptions and the rushing total to really beat him out. But I think, I like having him at the running back 11. This is going to be a very high scoring offense. We know that the Lions are an incredible team for running backs. You really, really want running backs in fantasy on that team. The receptions are locked in. Touchdowns are locked in. I know he's not necessarily going to get all 17 rushing touchdowns at the goal line basically for Jamal Williams had last season. A lot of those will go David Montgomery, but it doesn't matter. He'll have receiving touchdowns. He'll have touchdowns. They're still going to get him the ball. Like he's going to be a weapon, right? When they're in the red zone, it's not, got to bring him off the field for David Montgomery. No. If anything, they want to get him onto the field because they're going to have creative plays to get the ball into his hands. So definitely worth being the second running back off the board by like a good margin. Again, like by ADP 11 running back spots, I think that's basically worth it. But again, mine's a little bit shrunk. Again, Bijan at 4, running back 4, Gibbs at running back 11. After that, so I'm not going to include anyone else in A tier. You could argue because of landing spot that Devon Achane could sneak into there, but I really think we're seeing separation in S tier, A tier, and now down to B tier with Devon Achane. He goes off the board in like the middle-ish 3rd round, mid to late 3rd round by the Miami Dolphins. Another fantastic landing spot. So these top 3 running backs, all awesome landing spots. Underdog coming off the board as a running back 35. My running back 37. Realistically in that range, everyone's very, very close. So I think the ADP there makes sense. I would guess that on non-underdog leagues, he's going a little bit later. But like I said, it's the dream landing spot. We know that he's not going to get, 300 touches. It's just not going to happen. He's not big enough to handle that, but we don't care, right? If he had 300 touches on the Miami Dolphins, dude's what? I mean, if you knew he was going to get that, probably a top 5 pick in the draft. So that's why he's obviously going, more as a running back 35, is that he's not going to get that. But he doesn't have that much to beat out. Mostert, Jeff Wilson, these are like good players. They can be good in the system, but they're not world beaters. They're not all that good. We know he's going to have a role. They really, really like him over there. He's going to get plenty of touches, enough touches to pay off this ADP. I don't think he's going to be running back 1, but I really do think that he can be a consistent running back 2 like later in the season. Maybe not right away. Maybe they kind of mix him in, do like a gross 3-headed committee for the first few weeks. But as we start to get towards later in the season, I really think he's going to be just like a really good pick and someone you really want on Underdog as well, because he's a home run hitter, right? And a home run hitter in this offense, he'll have games where he only has like 10 carries, but he busts off 2 like 20, 30-yard runs, and it puts him like, over 100 yards, a touchdown. Like those are going to happen this season. So really, really like him. After that, so this is a flip. I used to have Charbonnet as the top running back. After the landing spot for him, he goes down. He doesn't necessarily, it's kind of tough to talk about because it's like he doesn't necessarily tank because the upside is still there. Charbonnet is still a really good talent, is good in the receiving game, and landed on a good offense that could use him. So the upside, theoretically, is all still there. His chances of hitting that upside are now lower because on Seattle, they have Ken Walker. And so if he wasn't there, like we're talking about just the player Charbonnet, really, really good, like an exceptional talent, has so much upside, especially in fantasy, because he can be a feature back, which many of these running backs can't be. But because he lands on the Seahawks and they've got another really good running back on the roster already, well, it's not like Charbonnet is going to be a feature back when Ken Walker is healthy, and we have no reason to think that he's not going to be healthy this season. So it's almost like when you think about like Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, to where it's like they're both really, really good, but now there's like another running back there, and so their upside remains. Their chances of hitting it are just lower. So that's kind of how we have to think about Charbonnet here. But coming off the board, an Underdog running back 31, my running back 42, I'm not sure exactly what I want to do, because basically I'm behind ADP on both Ken Walker and Charbonnet, because on average they're both going to disappoint given their ADPs. Because they both have that baked in upside of the other one could just get hurt, or they could just outproduce the other one, like Charbonnet or Ken Walker could both just come into camp and dominate and kind of push the other one back on the depth chart. Because that exists, maybe I'll project a little bit over 100% for the total workload on the ground for these running backs, just saying both of them have that baked in upside. So maybe not saying on average they both disappoint, but we should probably move them a little bit ahead of average, because if they hit, it could be really good. So that's kind of where I'm at there. But I definitely think the 4th running back in these rankings makes sense for Charbonnet. Moving on to the C tier, another good landing spot, Chase Brown. He came off the board later than some running backs we're going to talk about in this tier. Late 5th round, honestly. Not that great of draft capital. But, and you guys can see on the screen, Underdog running back 53, my running back 48, so a little bit ahead of ADP there. The landing spot is just awesome. Like landing on the Cincinnati Bengals, backing up Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon potentially facing suspension. We really don't know as far as that's concerned. I don't think Mixon is going to get cut. Like that's looking less and less likely, but it's still a very productive offense. Mixon is still a player that can get injured, right? Any running back can get injured, especially one that has as many touches as Mixon has each season. And so when you think about that upside, it's really high. But then also, I mean, you look back the last few seasons, like Samaje Perine was fine. Like even when Mixon was healthy, they were using Perine. So I expect Chase Brown to have a role on the offense even while Mixon is healthy. And again, a very high scoring offense. He's a very, very athletic player, dominated the combine. He's someone that can easily take it to the house in any play. he can just win with athleticism. And he's a player who can't necessarily handle, like we talked about some other players, like, 25 touches a game. So we don't care really that, we care that Mixon's there because, obviously you'd still prefer Chase to be the number one. But if Mixon is there, still playing and getting a decent amount of touches, Chase Brown is still good enough to handle 10 to 12 touches per game while Mixon is healthy. And that's really the optimal range for him to produce. So another player that I don't think, kind of like Achane, I don't think is going to be a running back one this season, but could I see a world where you're using Chase Brown in the flex? Chase Brown is filling in Mixon for a few weeks where he's injured. Chase Brown is kind of rotating into the running back 2 spot if you've got injuries and bye weeks because he's producing decently some weeks and he has upside. Or in weeks where we think, the Bengals are going to smoke some teams this season. You don't think there's going to be some fourth quarters where Chase Brown is just given a workload because they're already up by 25 points? Yeah. So it's all those situations can happen. And so I think I like him as a first player in this tier. But again, I'll actually say this tier is up for debate. And as you can see by my rankings, when I put everyone up, everyone is within, I think, 10 spots, and a few of them are within 2 or 3 spots. They're all very, very close. So I like all of the players in C tier very, very similarly. I would not care if you rearrange that order at all, but I think within this tier, do the rearranging. I don't think anyone bumps up to B tier with Achane and Charbonnet. So the next player we'll talk about here is Kendre Miller. Put him up there. Fourth running back off the board, we had Bijan, Gibbs, Charbonnet, and then Kendre Miller. Good landing spot, not necessarily a lock for immediate production, but I think a lot of people will put him first in this tier because if he hits big time. Not necessarily incredible in the receiving game, and so obviously them having Alvin Kamara there, that's a concern. If Alvin Kamara takes all of the targets and Kendre Miller doesn't have very many, that's a problem. The thing is, there's obviously a world where Kamara gets an 8-game suspension, so you could have half of the season, more than half of the regular season for fantasy, where it's really just Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams, and certainly possible that Kendre Miller, even as a rookie, is better than Jamal Williams. And so you could have him as a 1A, and someone this late, ADP 44, my ADP 54. Again, I think we can maybe have some room to move up there throughout the summer, depending on reports. That's why he's going so early is, well, if we get the 8-game suspension from Kamara and he's the 1A, obviously he's going to outproduce this ADP. Mine is lower because, we could see a 4-game suspension for Kamara. Okay, so now we've got a lot of weeks where it's Kamara, it's Jamal Williams, and it's Miller. And we could definitely see a world where Kamara's taking all the targets, where he's still getting work on the ground because he's Alvin Kamara, right? Alvin Kamara is still the 1A in this offense in the weeks that he's playing. And then we see Kendre Miller, we see Jamal Williams kind of split mostly early down work. Maybe they even use Jamal Williams like Detroit did at the goal line. And so you look at that outcome and you're like, ooh, that's not fantastic for fantasy. So a huge range of outcomes here really comes down to just watching the news with the Kamara suspension as those games increase, those projected games increase, or if we know it's going to boost up Kendre Miller a lot. But if it comes out and it's 4 games, his ADP should drop because, that's a lot of games where it's more of a 3-headed running back committee. Because a lot of people are saying oh, they're just not even going to use Jamal Williams. They're going to use Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams isn't an elite running back, but he is perfectly fine. He's really good in certain areas. He will have a role on this team. And so the weeks where all 3 of them are active, that's not going to be fantastic. After Kendre Miller, Roschon Johnson. Got decent draft capital. I think it was right around where people were projecting. Mid-4th round to the Chicago Bears. Underdog ADP is the running back 43. My running back 55, so 1 spot behind Kendre Miller. My thing is that we know that there won't be that many targets for running back in general. No matter who the running back is on the Bears, we're not going to project a lot of targets for the entirety of the position, all of the running backs there, because we know Fields isn't going to throw dump-offs to running backs. When you have more mobile quarterbacks, historically, they just, I don't even care if the offense changes at all. Historically, they do not throw to running backs as much because if they're scrambling, well, would you rather Fields throws a dump off to a running back or take off for 15 yards? Obviously, he's going to take off and just like, those yards go to him and not the running back, whereas you have more like statues in the pocket. Well, if they're trying to run around, they want to get that ball out, they're throwing to the running back. So just the type of player that Fields is, he's just not going to throw to running backs as much. He will a little bit, but it won't be that much. And so when you have that in the back of your mind, I am a Khalil Herbert truther. I just think Khalil Herbert is a really good running back, a really good talent. I don't think as a rookie, Roschon's going to step in there and be the 1A. I don't think that's going to happen. And so if I think his upside is the 1B with minimal receptions, he needs an injury. And again, the people ahead of him in this tier, I don't think need an injury. I think Kendre Miller is talented enough to get more touches on the Saints offense when everyone's healthy than Roschon can when everyone is healthy on Chicago. And the same thing with Chase Brown. If you're shooting for upside, you probably want to move Chase Brown behind Roschon and maybe even behind Tyjae Spears, we're going to talk about in a second, because I don't think the ceiling on Chase Brown is as high. But if we're talking about, what outcomes we expect to happen, I still think the average outcome of Chase Brown is higher than Miller and Roschon. But speaking of Spears, fell a little bit in the draft. I mean, mid-third round was sort of where I thought. I think he fell a little bit further than we thought he would. Questionable landing spot. You could call it fantastic if you think that, you're just looking for a handcuff and you're saying, well, if Derrick Henry gets hurt and they lean on Spears, he's going to be incredible. But it's obviously bad for an average outcome, because if Derrick Henry stays healthy, Spears can only get so many carries. I don't care how good you think Spears is. Derrick Henry's better, and he's going to get all the touches that he can handle. So it depends how you're viewing it. If you really like him and you're like, I actually love this outcome because I only wanted him as a handcuff anyways, and if he had landed on a different team where the path was clearer, he obviously would be going earlier in drafts. So it really just depends on that. The one thing people are going to point to is the knee. People are kind of expecting he's going to have a shorter career. But again, this is a redraft video. Do we really care if maybe he only plays 6 years in the NFL? In Dynasty, you can start looking at that, but don't even think about it in a redraft league because you don't care. You're only thinking about this season. So don't worry that his knees might not be able to handle, 7-8 years of running back in the NFL. We're only looking at this season. D tier. This is where it starts to get questionable. So everyone that we've talked about right now, we've got 8 running backs on the board. Really good picks, in my opinion. I don't think there's any sort of roster construction that you wouldn't want to take them in. I would not be mad at anyone for reaching for these players if you really like them. These are all good picks. As we move through the rest of the drafts, there are a lot of problems with some of the running backs we're going to talk about. So headline the D tier is Deuce Vaughn. His issue is obviously that he weighs 100 pounds. He is very, very small, 5'5". Goes in the late 6th round. We talked about my model doesn't like him if he was going past the early 5th round, late 6th round. However, running back 64 on Underdog, my running back 58, a little bit ahead because he landed on Dallas. It was a great landing spot. We're fairly confident the team is going to utilize him, going to give him a chance to produce. And so it just projects well. You don't have to give him, I think I gave him a 5.5% target share, and he comes out around here with basically no carries, very, very few carries. A lot of running backs even after him are projected for more carries. It's just a really good offense that's going to score a lot of touchdowns. And if they use him, in the receiving game at all, he's going to be good. Now, doesn't have the same upside as a lot of these players. If we're looking at Spears, Roschon, Kendre Miller, because if Tony Pollard got hurt, they would probably sign a free agent. They would probably bring someone in to get more of those snaps in early downs. Deuce Vaughn's role would increase. But again, he's 5'5", and what is it, 165 pounds? He doesn't weigh anything. 179 maybe? I don't know. Under 180. He doesn't weigh much. So he's never going to get all of those carries. And so the upside not as high, but listen, if we're looking in the 60s for running backs, if you can get me someone who on a really good offense is going to have a 5 to 6% target share, that's really, really valuable. And especially in a full PPR league, that's good. That's good for this range. Not many of these players have more than a 2% projected target share for their draft. After him, I don't really have a big take on Tank Bigsby. I didn't I didn't necessarily plan on doing the two bigs there. But Tank Bigsby, I don't have a good take on him. Goes earlier than I think a lot of people expected. Late third round. That's good draft capital. To the Jaguars. Well, that's a really good team. They already invested heavily in Travis Etienne, though. And we're pretty confident Tank Bigsby isn't going to take over as the 1A without an injury. But it is similar to some of these players we've talked about before, where it's like, well, if he's on a good team and he's obviously the number 2, like there's no one that's really competing with him for that number 2 spot unless he like comes into camp and just is terrible, which I don't expect to happen. You know, like if Etienne gets injured, he's going to be really, really good in fantasy. So another player that really good as a handcuff late. I just like, when I was evaluating these players, I didn't personally think he was like nearly as good as Kendre Miller, Roschon, Spears. So if we're looking at players who I want to be targeting as backups if the first player gets injured, well, we're not good at predicting injury. So I don't want to say that certain players are like more or less likely to get injured. I just want to say if that happens, who do I think can do really, really well? I'm more confident in Miller, Roschon, Spears than I am Tank Bigsby. I'm just not super confident in his talent. But if you are, put him in C tier. Put him in a tier above. E tier. Things are starting to get a little bit gross now. Unfortunately, our guy Israel Abanikanda, I'm pretty sure I'm saying it right now. Let me know in the comment section. Or Abanikanda. I think it's Abanikanda. Anyways, goes way later than we were hoping. I was hoping he'd go maybe late 3rd, early 4th round. Goes in the early 5th round and to the Jets. Now that could work out if Breece Hall, you know, maybe he suffers a setback. Maybe he takes a step back after the injury. Not expecting either of these things to happen. That's why he's ranked so low. But if it does happen, well, now Israel's obviously going to be not necessarily the feature back, but he's going to at least be the 1A. Like he's still a really good running back. He'll definitely produce. It's just that, like, that's the only outcome. Like, if Breece Hall is at all healthy, Abanikanda is not, he's not getting any of this workload in the receiving game. He's basically coming in as a change of pace back to get a few carries per game and to see if he can bust a long one. And so I don't see that ceiling without an injury. And then also, even after the injury, they have other running backs they still like, especially in the receiving game. And so I'm just not in love with it anymore. I wanted a better landing spot. I wanted him to go earlier in the draft. The fact that all teams really passed on him up to this point is an indication maybe they don't believe in the talent as much. Plus, again, landing behind, you know, an exceptional running back in Breece Hall, who by every indication is going to be perfectly fine in week 1. Not in love with it. After, maybe a bit of a surprise for some people, but Sean Tucker, undrafted, didn't even get drafted, but signed with the Bucs. And realistically, so if you look at like contracts, running backs that go really late in the draft oftentimes can actually make less money than a free agent that signs. And especially like Sean Tucker, a lot of teams really, really wanted him after the draft. Like he got a good contract. Like he is going to be on this team as long as he like medically can. Again, he fell in the draft because teams weren't confident in like the heart condition that he had. But a lot of teams still wanted him as an undrafted free agent. The Bucs get him. Realistically, I like Rachaad White, but I'm not super confident that Rachaad White is going to be an incredible running back in this league. He was highly inefficient last season. There's no indication that, you know, they're like, oh, you know, don't worry about like Sean Tucker's just depth. Like I'm pretty sure they're bringing Sean Tucker in to compete with Rachaad White for the lead role. He's just this low because, I mean, he could definitely get cut. And again, you can see on the screen, running back 78 on Underdog, 69 in my ranking. So I have him as a good value. I just think he's a really good pick as your last running back, right? You're super late in the draft. Probably don't need to in redraft leagues that are like 15 rounds. You're probably not even making it to like the running back 70 range. But on Underdog, in leagues that have 8, 9 bench spots, as your last running back, he's a good talent. And if they can clear him medically, I think there's a world where he can beat out Rachaad White. And that's all we're asking for is, could it happen? And if it can happen, how good will you be? I think there's a chance he could be really good. That's not something I can say about basically like the remaining running backs on this team. And so this is where he goes in the rankings. After him, Evan Hull. Went a little bit earlier than people expected, late 5th round. That's not early, but earlier than people thought. Lands on the Colts. Obviously, that's a problem. They have Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is very good. He will be the lead back. But ADP, running back 74, my running back 70. It's the receptions. If Jonathan Taylor, just like last season, suffers an ankle sprain, misses like a month, 2 months of the season, I think Hull can be productive. He's a smaller back, but still good in the receiving game, was highly productive in college. I think the talent is there, but it's a similar case as some of the other backs we talked about, where it's like, if we're looking at the overall ceiling, well, like Sean Tucker definitely has a higher overall ceiling than Evan Hull. It's just that Hull is still like a really good pick late in drafts, because there is still a chance. Like, remember, we were using some of the running backs who are not good behind Jonathan Taylor last season, because it's like, well, if you have still the lead back on a team, they're going to be good, especially when they go in the receiving game. Evan Hull, phenomenal in the receiving game. One of the best receiving backs in this draft class. And so I like him in that spot, and especially on Underdog. If we're just kind of looking for like a few weeks, maybe there's a few weeks where the Colts are getting decimated. They take Taylor off the field, and Hull can rack up 5-6 receptions. Certainly possible. If he's on the field there, he can score some touchdowns. Like, a really good pick late in drafts. Last player in the E tier, Zach Evans. He went way later than a lot of people were hoping. Late 6th round to the Rams. Underdog ADP 60, my rank 72. I feel like the Underdog ranking right there is still kind of like holding on to what people were hoping he would be. Cam Akers is a better running back in my opinion. I was never very high on Zach Evans. My model was never very high on Zach Evans. He's just like fine. He's not someone I'm going to be targeting personally late in drafts. I would definitely like the 3 running backs in this E tier that I talked about before him. I'm not in love with him, but I know a lot of you don't like Cam Akers. You don't like, T.N. Evans, the other running back that they didn't actually draft, signed. We'll talk about in a second. But you don't like maybe the rest of their backfield, and you think that, Zach Evans is just better than his draft capital was. Sure, go for him. Again, this is like the last round. We're not really concerned about reaching for anyone when their ADP is running backs like 60 to 70. Just take who you want. F tier. This is basically you probably don't need to bother with this tier. They absolutely need an injury. Many of them, even if there's an injury, it's just probably not going to happen. We've got Chris Rodriguez. We've got Kenny McIntosh, Eric Gray, Dwayne McBride, T.N. Evans, and Keaton Mitchell. We'll just throw all of them onto the screen right now. Everyone on the screen right now has an 80 or had a draft capital of 6th round or later, besides Eric Gray. Eric Gray, of course, backing up Saquon now for the Giants. Again, none of these running backs, in my opinion, are amazing. I think McIntosh has a chance. I'm still going to hold on to it, even though he tested horribly athletically, cratered in the draft. The problem is I have to crater him in the rankings because he landed on the Seahawks, right? I mean, even though he's a good receiving back, and I think there's a world where he has the most receptions among the running backs on this roster, like more receptions than Charbonnet, more receptions than Ken Walker. It's just like, he's obviously behind them. He tested horribly athletically again. Like there's a world where he's cut. There's absolutely a world where McIntosh isn't even on the roster. So he's got to be in this tier. But I hold out some hope. But everyone else, it's like, Chris Rodriguez, no. Like, I don't think you need to be drafting him. Can't catch, not landing on a good offense. He's on the Commanders, clearly behind Bijan Robinson and Antonio Gibson, so not in love with that. Again, if you want Eric Gray as a handcuff, totally fine. I don't think he's that good. Dwayne McBride, some people are excited about, lands on the Vikings in the early 7th round. But let's be honest, like, you need Dalvin Cook gone. Like, you need Dalvin Cook to be traded away, which is looking much less likely now. And even if that happens, he's still backing up Alexander Madison. I don't think McBride's that good. I wouldn't be drafting him late. And then T.N. Evans, Keaton Mitchell, neither of them got drafted. T.N. Evans goes to the Rams. He signs there. Mitchell signs with the Ravens. These are undrafted running backs in a terrible running back class. Like, if this was an amazing running back class and they happen to sneak out of the draft, sure, I don't think we need to be going after too many undrafted running backs in this class, unless, again, Sean Tucker, we know the reason. It was the heart condition, but if he's cleared to play, we don't care about that. And he would have probably gone without that in like the 4th round. So you can almost think of him as a 4th round pick. So that'll do it for this one. Again, next week will be all running backs, so not just the rookies. We'll talk about all the running back rankings. And then on Friday of this week, we'll do the same video for wide receivers. That'll do it for this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.